Good morning. Well, I was standing in the back there by the door. I noticed a technical problem.
Chris, cover your mic.
I am? Oh, let's use this one. Hello. I noticed a technical problem. If you look up at the screen behind me, it looks a lot more lonesome than it really is. So I'm wondering if all of you, or at least the bravest of you, could please come up and sit in these chairs on camera so that if strangers are looking at us on Zoom, they won't think we're a bunch of losers, all right? How about there? Excellent, thank you very much. Yeah, there you go. So you can't show that off if you're sitting back there. Show it off. There it is, all of us, all right.
It was a gift from my friends over at Spencer's.
Excellent, well, you've earned your seat up front. All right, there you go. Any other brave souls? All right, it is what it is. Welcome. So we begin our service today with Ludwig von Beethoven. Thank you, Robin. There it is. So we begin our service today by acknowledging that we are on, right now, the traditional lands of the Westo people, the Savannah Shawnees, and the Yuki people of the Muskogee Confederacy. The lands around Augusta were ceded under pressure from the United States government in 1790 during the Treaty of New York. And further land was taken under pressure to the state of Georgia in 1825 under the Treaty of Washington. This acknowledgement supports the tribal sovereignty of all the Muskogee tribes and the needs of all Native Americans and indigenous people. I'm Chris Garcia. I'm going to be your worship host today, and I'm co-creating with our musician, Robin Macy, and with all of you together. Visitors, I see a few out here. You are welcome. How many children we got? I see one. We got one. We got one? Okay. The sermon also, one more thing. For those of you who are visitors, if you see a blue card in the seat in front of you, it would help us to keep in touch with you if that's what you want, and help you to be more connected with us if that's what you would like. Please come and say hi to us after service. Those of you who are new to our church or Unitarianism, we have our communion hour after the service in the common room with a lot of coffee, pie and cookies and goodies and good conversation, which is good for the soul. And we will know you by your orange tag. So please come get to know us. We would like to get to know you. This morning, our sermon is going to be Lessons from the Whirlwind, a UU Buddhist perspective on the book of Job, my favorite book in the Bible, the book of Job. Anybody who thinks the Bible is boring and pedantic, you haven't read the book of Job. All right. This sermon explores the book of Job from the Hebrew Bible for what it can teach us today about how we approach suffering. And who can't relate to that? Our own or that of others, and what we make of those forces of mystery beyond our control when they seem to be working in opposition to our own desires. It's a part folktale, part pastoral care, case study, and part rich theological exploration. This ancient text is one of the favorites of our speaker, Natalia Taylor Bowdoin, who will be leading us on this journey. Natalia was born and raised as a Unitarian Universalist in Atlanta, which makes her unusual since most of us are refugees from other religions. She is the original. She has left the UU faith for 18 years to study and practice Buddhism, primarily in the Vajrayana, which is the Tibetan tradition. Dalai Lama. She returned to the UU fold when she moved back to Augusta in 2007 and now claims dual belonging to both religions, Buddhism and Unitarian Universalism. She holds graduate degrees from the University of Arizona and Indiana University and is right now pursuing a Master of Divinity at the Earlham School of Religion, which is a Quaker seminary in Indiana. She is currently the Library Collections Coordinator and Associate Professor at the University of South Carolina, Aiken. And she lives in Augusta with her family and their 4 cats and a big Great Dane and a mischievous hamster named Twitchy. And if I was a hamster living next to 4 cats and a real big dog, I'd be kind of twitchy too. All right, let's go.
Okay, welcome to all near and my family from afar too. Our chalice lighting today comes from Julianne Lepp. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that this is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and welcoming of multiple truths. Now, please rise in body or spirit for our first hymn, number 18 in the gray hymnal, What Wondrous Love.
Now is the time when we gather and share those joys and sorrows that have come into our lives over this last week.
To help others transform difficulty into beauty and strength. So thank you. And we will sing the children out for those who are going to the classrooms. Another meditation. This is a traditional meditation called metta meditation that is found in most types of Mahayana Buddhism. So metta is the Sanskrit word for loving kindness, and the meditation we'll be doing will be a loving kindness meditation for ourselves and others. And as I mentioned to the children, Kuan Yin is known as the Bodhisattva of compassion and loving kindness. And in Mahayana Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, bodhisattvas are beings who have reached a high level of awareness, that so much enlightenment that they could actually be conceived of as being Buddhas, but they choose to stay among us and work among us until all beings are free of suffering. So they are a mythological being, but I believe that there are many bodhisattvas among us here today. So for this meditation, please try to get comfortable again in your chair and in the room. And if it's helpful to close your eyes, you can do that, or lower your eyes if that's helpful. And it may be helpful to raise your shoulders a little bit up to your ears and then drop them down. Maybe try that one more time if it's helpful, up to your ears and drop them down. And just feel the breath coming into your body, filling your belly, make your belly soft. And I want you to visualize facing yourself, seeing yourself, and telling yourself, may I be safe, may I be well, may I be peaceful and at ease, may I be free of suffering. May I be safe, may I be well, may I be peaceful and at ease, may I be free of suffering. So take just a moment with that. Now visualize someone you feel close to, someone you love very much. It may be someone who has already passed away. It may be somebody presently. It may be a pet. Visualize saying to them, may you be safe. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be free of suffering. May you be safe. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be free of suffering. Now visualize someone you feel neutral towards. It may be someone who rung you up at the grocery store. It may be somebody you passed on the street while you were walking, but you don't feel negatively towards them or positively towards them either. Visualize saying to them, may you be safe, may you be well, may you be peaceful and at ease, may you be free of suffering. May you be safe, may you be well, may you be peaceful and at ease, may you be free of suffering. Now visualize someone you're struggling with currently, someone, and it may be someone very close to you that you love, but you're struggling with them. Or it may be somebody you don't even know, but you hear about them often and it raises difficult emotions for you. Visualize saying to them and seeing them and facing them, may you be well, may you be safe, may you be peaceful and at ease, may you be free of suffering, may you be safe, may you be well, may you be peaceful and at ease, may you be free of suffering. And now visualize sending those thoughts, those prayers out to everyone, everywhere, all of us. May we be safe, may we be well, may we be peaceful and at ease, may we be free of suffering. May we be safe, may we be well, may we be peaceful and at ease, may we be free of suffering. We'll sit in silence with that for a moment.
Probably a couple days ago, I was volunteering at the mill. There we go. Good. All right. I love volunteering at the Miller because I'm kind of a mooch. That way I get to do something good and see the show for free. Friday night we had a funny man named James Gregory. I had never heard of him, but a lot of people had, because we had close to 1,000 people. Miller, they loved him. I was working the balconies. It was kind of hard to see that far away. You could tell when he came on stage that he was in kind of poor health. He was moving kind of slow. But the audience cheered him. The audience clapped for him. They were so excited to see this person, this old guy. And as soon as he heard that, it was like some life force was just breathed into him. He just came alive. And his theatrical skill, his timing, his voice, it's all there. One of the nice things about the Miller is you get a chance to see on a good night the phenomenon of an audience and a performer kind of finding each other. Janis Joplin once said, every night I make love to 10,000 people and then I go home alone. And after the show, some of us were coming out of the stage door, because that's where the volunteers leave. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you run into the performers of the band, whoever it is coming out of the same door, and you get to talk to them a little bit. ran into James Gregory in the parking lot. I had a chance to make him laugh a little bit. Anyway, we had a chance to talk to him and to make him laugh a little bit. And without his audience, it was as if something had really gone out of him. He was old. He was pretty sick. He seemed to me in that moment one of the loneliest people I think I had seen. This was a performer with a big following. 1,000 people came out of nowhere and cheered him on. He was kind of a right-wing comedian. I didn't even know there was such a thing. First one I ever heard. He was pretty funny, but I saw what a difference it made, having people who loved him, except that, like Janis Joplin, every night he has to go home alone. That must be hard, getting back on the tour bus at that age. Here, you have people you can come back to every week if you want to. Here, you have an audience. Here, you have a connection. In Buddhism, there's a phrase called Sangha. Sangha means community. It's a requisite of Buddhist practice across almost all forms of Buddhism. It's not an option. It's part of your practice to have a spiritual community. And in that moment in the parking lot, I understood that. And every time I come here, I understand that brand new. Spiritual practice goes through all of you together. This is Sangha. This is refuge. You can't make it that way, but it's an opportunity for you to make it that way. And if you can, it'll make you bigger. You have a really good deal here. You need to take care of that deal. And now's your chance to do that. May the ushers please come forward. For generosity, we thank you.
Our reading today is going to be a responsive reading, a poem from Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poets. And it's number 536 in your gray hymnal. And I will begin with the poem, and if the congregation reads the pieces in italics, we'll go that way. Every morning, the world is created. And fasten themselves to the high branches, and the ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies. And if your spirit carries within it the thorn that is heavier than lead, if it's all you can do to keep on trudging, each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer heard and answered lavishly every morning. Get my technology set up here. Okay, so Job. I hope everyone's ready for this. I am very grateful to be here today and to get to talk about one of my very favorite spiritual texts of late, the book of Job. When Reverend Nick asked if I would do a service and he said the topic was completely up to me, should I do anything over here? Okay, and turn off my lav? Okay. Okay. How's that? Better? Okay, we'll start again. So Reverend Nick said I could do a service on whatever I want. And so I thought about a few different things, but then I really came down to this piece, which was calling me the book of Job and what we can learn from it today. So why Job? So as you know, I grew up Unitarian Universalist in Atlanta, but I also went to an Episcopalian school for the first 7 years of my life, unrelated to my UU upbringing. So I got a smattering of biblical texts here and there, but not very much and not in any deep and kind of deep or meaningful way. And I had heard of the book of Job growing up now and then, just hearing that it was about someone who suffered a great deal. Later, I heard that it was about someone who suffered a great deal, but never cursed God about his suffering. And that was sort of the common story I heard about Job, that he was rewarded in the end and he never cursed God. Well, that's really not the whole story, and not really how the story goes. When I finally read the story, so I started seminary at Earlham School of Religion a few years ago. And very shortly after I started seminary, I had only had one class, and my mother died of untreated lung cancer, and I was diagnosed within 2 months of that of my own cancer, stage 3 colon cancer. And I was also going through the end of a relationship. And I thought, I am having a Job experience. So as a result, I read the book, or I tried to read the book of Job. I hadn't yet taken any courses on the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and I was just completely overwhelmed by it. It was long and complex, and it didn't seem to resonate with what I had heard about it. So I laid it down, and I completed my cancer treatment, which took about 7 months. And after regaining some strength, I restarted my seminary program, and I took an intro to the Old Testament. And later, I took a wisdom literature class, and wisdom literature in the Old Testament includes the book of Job and a handful of other texts. So it's from these experiences that I've really become a huge fan of this book and relating it to my own life and what I see in other people's lives. And it also has been interesting to me to relate it to my own study and practice of Buddhism as well. So that's why I chose it, and that's why what I'm going to try to share with you today. So there are several aspects of Job that I find fascinating, and I won't really be able to go fully into depth in any of them, but just kind of give some broad brush strokes. One of the things about the text from a literary standpoint or view is the construction of the book is interesting. It starts out very much like a folk tale that reflects and kind of mimics some of the other folk tales circulating in that region of the world at that time, which was between, scholars say, between 4th and 7th century BCE. So it mimics some of that story at the very beginning of the text. And it starts out with this narrative that I'll go into about God and Satan and Job. And then after that piece, it's full of dialogues and poetry and speeches by Job, speeches by Job's friends, and then finally by speeches from God. And then it ends with that folktale kind of like ending that also is similar to others in the region. So there's this kind of strange schizophrenia disjuncture experience with it of multiple stories being told by different people at different times. So from that angle, it's quite interesting. There's also the pastoral care aspect of it, which is interesting to me personally. I'm interested in chaplaincy and trying to potentially pursue that. And having spent a lot of time in hospitals with other people, I'm interested in what happens in hospitals and what goes on as people try to figure out what's happening to them and make sense of what's happening. And as people try to come to some kind of peace about what's happening to them sometimes. So it's an excellent pastoral care case study between Job and his friends. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, the story is a deep theological investigation of ideas of God, how we conceive God, what God is doing, what God has done or hasn't done, God's role in our own suffering, and the injustice of undeserved suffering, forces we can't control. And it deals with the question of evil, or in theology, what we call theodicy, the sort of attempts to justify and defend God in the face of an existence of evil. If God is good or all powerful, how can evil exist? So it really grapples with that issue. So those are the reasons I find it very fascinating and relatable to my own situation and those I see among others. So let me give a brief summary of the story to remind us, or if you aren't familiar with it. How many people have read the book of Job? Okay, so maybe about half. So the story begins with Job, hence the name, and he's an excellent citizen. He's known as the most upright, the greatest man in the East. He lives in an area called Uz, U-Z, not Oz, but he's, which is southeast of Israel. And he's known for fearing God and being blameless and upright, and he shuns evil, and he's a perfect man. And he's also very wealthy. And he's got 10 children. He's got 7 boys, 7 sons, 3 daughters, and a whole bunch of livestock, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and a whole bunch of servants. So he's doing really well. And he is so upright and blameless. His children, as children sometimes do, like to have parties, and they go off and have parties at each other's houses. And they have feasts, and they hang out all night long. And Job is such a righteous man that he really worries about that. He's afraid they're doing something probably maybe unrighteous at those parties. So after every feast, he goes and makes burnt offerings to God on behalf of each child in case they did anything wrong at those parties. So he probably was pretty busy with 10 children who like parties. So we're introduced to him, and then the scene switches to the heavenly realm, and the humans are completely unaware of what's going on in the heavenly realm. And there we see God with a host of heavenly beings around God, the divine council, or angels. So they've all come to present themselves to God, and Satan is there. And the name Hasatan really means the adversary. So it's not the devil that we see later in Jewish and Christian tradition. It's really an adversary to humans, not necessarily to God, God's self.
So, and in this story, Satan or Hasatan, the adversary, is kind of acting as God's eyes and ears on earth, which is kind of interesting if you think about that for a little bit. But basically what happens between God and Satan is this wager, and Job unfortunately gets completely caught in the balance of that wager. So God says to Satan, "Where have you come from? What are you up to?" And Satan says, "Well, I've just been traveling to and fro across the earth, just checking things out." And God says, "Well, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth. He is blameless and upright. He fears God and turns from evil." And Satan just laughs at this and scoffs and says, "Well, that's because, he's got everything he needs. He's got all these children, he's got all these possessions and livestock. Why would he not be blameless and upright? You've given him everything. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And so God says, okay, well, let's see. And go do your worst with him, but don't touch Job himself. And Satan says, "Okay, I won't touch Job himself." So Satan goes off to see what kind of misery he can bestow onto Job. So back at the ranch with Job, Job is relaxing in his house, and a servant runs up panting, disheveled, and says, "I am so very sorry, but the Sabaeans," which was a group of people near Job's area, "the Sabaeans attacked your oxen and your donkeys, and they killed all of them. And they killed the servants too. And I was the only one that managed to escape and survive, and I'm here to tell you that, and I'm so sorry." Just as he finishes his speech, another servant runs up, out of breath, disheveled, and says, "Job, you're not going to believe this. This is terrible, but fire of God fell from the sky and killed all your sheep, your 7,000 sheep, and it killed all your servants except for me. And I'm the only one who survived, and I'm so sorry." Then another servant runs up, and it's starting to get a little ridiculous. This one also exhausted, and he says, "A war party of Chaldeans came up also and killed your camels, 3,000 camels, and they killed all your servants, and I was the only one who survived." Then finally, a fourth servant runs up, exhausted, panting, and says, "Job, your children were at a feast at the older brother's house, and a big wind came up out of nowhere from the desert. The house collapsed. Your children are dead." So at this, that was the last straw. And Job fell on the ground. He tore his clothing. He shaved his head, all of which are signs of grief and mourning. And he fell on the ground and worshiped, though. And with all this suffering he was suddenly brought face to face with, he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So just kind of a big surprise. He's suffering, but he's not cursing God. So now we go back to heaven. God is there with the heavenly council, and Satan is there again. And God says, "Hey, Satan, where have you been? What are you up to?" And Satan says, "Well, I've been wandering around the earth, going to and fro, checking things out." And God says again, "Have you considered my servant Job? He is blameless and upright. He didn't even curse me, although you provoked me against him." So God is sort of laying the blame on Satan for provoking God into causing this misery for Job. And Satan again laughs and says, "Well, of course you take away someone's possessions. It's kill their children. It's a big deal, but they're still not going to curse you. But if you touch Job himself, he will curse you to your face." And so God again says, "Okay, well, let's see how that goes. Go do your worst, but don't kill him. Spare his life. That's my only boundary." And so Satan goes off to see what he can do to Job again. So here's Job suffering with the loss of his children and all his livestock. And he starts to be just covered with sores. and wounds, and they are not healing, and he is just suffering miserably. And at this point, things are going to start to change. His wife still says to him, "What's wrong with you? You're suffering so much bad has happened, and you still believe in God." And he still says, "Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad?" So he's still trying to hold on to that God. But that doesn't last very long. And this is where the story really becomes more powerful and relatable and interesting. So Job is sitting on a heap of dirt and ashes covered with sores and worms and bugs, and he's suffering. Nobody wants to be near him. And Job's 3 good friends come up, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and they've heard how badly he's doing, and they come to visit him. And they are so overtaken by his condition and how miserable he is that they also fall down on the ground and tear their clothes. But they just sit with him for 7 days and they don't say anything. They're just there with him. And after those 7 days, Job starts to talk. And this begins a series of speeches, some of them quite long, where Job is trying to make sense of what's happened to him and to express it to his friends who've come to help him. And what Job cannot understand is that what's happening to Job and Job's theology about God and the way he was raised to understand God, that if you do good things and you're upright and blameless, you will be rewarded, you will not be punished. Those things are just not connecting at all. So that's the theology Job grew up with. It's the theology his friends grew up with. He's had a reputation of living to that theology. So he's trying to make sense of it. And his friends really can't make sense of it at all either. So they come to the conclusion that he must have done something wrong. They said, well, maybe you've forgotten something you didn't think you thought it was minor, but it really wasn't so minor. Or maybe these offerings you've been doing for your children, you didn't quite get right. But God doesn't do this. You must have done something wrong. And Job just keeps telling them again and again, no, you're wrong. I have done everything right. I know it. I have always been righteous. I have always praised God. I have never taken anything for granted. I've done good things. I've fed orphans. I've helped people when they needed help. I've done nothing wrong. And they just won't let it go. You had to have done something wrong. And they've come there to comfort him, but and they're trying to make sense of it with their own theology, but also they kind of need to be reassured that this is not going to happen to them. So, if they can believe that he did something wrong, it helps them. So Job really is miserable. He starts wishing he was dead. He curses the day of his birth. He wishes God had closed the womb. Job starts to talk about how can this righteous God do this to people who are innocent, slaves and servants suffering? Did they do anything wrong? Why are they suffering like that, under backbreaking conditions and then just perishing? So he's really trying to make sense of this theology and his experiences, and he can't. And this goes back and forth with his friends, and he gets so frustrated with them that he just doesn't even want to talk to them anymore. So then another guy comes up, this young guy, who's not really Job's friend, but he knows Job. Elihu comes up, and he's much younger than Job and Job's friend. So he says that's why he didn't say anything earlier. He wanted to respect the elders, and he knows he's a young upstart. But he's so frustrated with his 3 friends and with Job that he just can't wait anymore, and he's got to tell Job what he thinks. So he goes into his speech, and his determination is not necessarily that Job has sinned per se, but that Job is being boastful and is being arrogant. And that what God is doing is really to correct Job, to educate Job. So Job should really be grateful, because that's what's happening. It's like Job is the student and God is the teacher, and God's using this to teach him. So that's what he comes up with as a reason. And Job doesn't really appreciate that advice too much either. So finally, up to now, Job has been talking with his friends. He's been kind of wailing aloud to the universe, but now he starts to address God directly. And he says, I really want to see you face to face. I want you to come down here and I want to present my case. You can present your side. I can present my side. We can have like a trial. We can have an arbiter, I think that's how you say it. And they can decide, but I really want to state my case and I want to hear your case. So he uses this legalistic kind of argument or language to talk to God. And then God does show up. So God appears in this massive storm, massive. And it often gets translated as a whirlwind. But what it's really like, my Hebrew Bible professor, Reverend Nancy Bowen, talked about the real translation is more of a haboob, which is like a massive dust storm. And you can see them out in Arizona. You can see them in the Near East in this region. They're massive, miles long. You can see them coming. It's like a wall of dust and dirt and sand. And they're terrifying. And when they envelop you, you cannot see anything. It's like being in a sandstorm, except that your eyes and your nose and your mouth are full of sand and dust. So that's how God shows up for Job. It's not a whirlwind. It's not even a tornado. It is this massive, all-encompassing sandstorm. So one of the things I love about the book of Job is that it is the place in both the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and New Testament that has the longest monologue from God. So I find that pretty interesting. And then also, I think it is the most dramatic way that God kind of shows up. There's a name for that, theophany. A theophany is when the divine shows up in a physical form very unexpectedly and for a short period of time. So it's not like incarnation like we see in the New Testament, but it's a theophany. You see it often in the Hebrew Bible of God showing up briefly in a burning bush or a pillar of light and sand and wind. But I think this has got to be the most dramatic ways that God shows up. So that's another reason I really like this story. And then what is also so fascinating is that God really doesn't answer Job. This is the longest speech in both testaments, and God doesn't answer Job about why he is suffering undeservedly. So that's interesting. Instead, God starts to talk about the universe, the earth, and all the wild creatures in the earth. And God uses very powerful language, very beautiful, poetic language. So this is not the same naive, folktale-ish sort of Disney God at the beginning of the story that's almost laughable in the wager with Satan. This is a whole different God. And God is using this vivid imagery and this cosmic imagery, talking about the foundations of the earth and the morning stars and the sea and the dawn and the light and the dark and the thunderbolts and the rain and the constellations in the heaven. That's what God is talking about. And it's almost, to paraphrase what God is kind of getting at is, at one point God says, who's done something so spectacular as all this? And can you? So then God talks about the animals of the earth, and they're not just any animals like my Twitchy or my Great Dane or my cat. God is talking about the wild animals, the untamable animals, talking about lions, ravens, mountain goats, the wild ox, the ostrich, the violent war horse, and birds of prey. And God is just bringing up all these animals and finally talks about the behemoth and the leviathan. And we don't really know what creatures God was talking about according to the text in that time, but some have proposed that God was talking about the hippopotamus and the crocodile. But who knows, maybe there were some other creatures that were being talked about. But in any case, God is really implying that humans are tiny. Humans are really a minuscule part of this earth, and this universe is wild and majestic, and birds stay in the air, creatures stay in the sea, they manage to feed themselves. There's so much going on, and humans are one tiny, tiny part of it. So it's a very different story than we heard in Genesis 1 about humans' dominion over the earth. It's a very different story from God. So God doesn't answer Job about why Job is suffering unjustly. But at the end of God's speeches about the incredible universe and nature and all the animals and the beasts that are managing to feed their children and stay alive, by the end of all that, Job kind of says, I kind of don't really know what I'm talking about. And I'm kind of sorry to bother you. I'm just going to go back to my life now. But he also says a very interesting thing. He said, I had heard of you with my ear, but now I see you. And that's a line that really sticks with me from the story. So then we go back to this folktale narrative kind of Disney ending that scholars say was added much later. And Satan is nowhere to be found. Satan seems to have dropped off the face of the earth, is kind of missing in action. So we get a hint that the people who wrote that last part of the story weren't necessarily the same folks who wrote the beginning, where Satan was the key to all this trouble. And God says to Job's friends, you all were wrong. You, friends of Job, you were wrong, and Job was right. And I'm going to give Job back all his animals. I'm going to actually increase his livestock, and I'm going to give him children again. And these daughters are going to be even more beautiful than the last ones. And so Job was again the wealthiest man in the East, and Job's friends gather around him and commiserate with him. In an interesting turn of tradition, Job leaves his inheritance to both his daughters and his sons, which was unheard of at that time. So you do have this fairy tale kind of Disney ending to the story. But what's interesting in that ending is, why does God say Job's friends were wrong and that Job was right? Because if you look at it from the big picture of the story, he was rewarded in the end, So, weren't his friends right? But what God is really possibly saying, or you could interpret it that way, is that Job's questioning of the common theology of that time and day was right. And Job questioning God's actions and God's role in the execution of justice in the human realm was right, because God's not really involved with that. So you could read it that way. So from the pastoral care perspective, and we talked a lot about this in my Hebrew Bible class, the friends' silence at the beginning was probably the most helpful thing that they did. And they probably should have just left after that, or kept silent. And it's something we all need to remember when we're being with someone who's suffering, that just sharing space with someone, sharing space is important. You don't have to always offer words, and sometimes your words may not have the right impact that you mean them to. So it's an important lesson for us to remember of how we confront others' suffering, how we sit with others' suffering, and remember that a lot of their response, which ended up being harmful to Job, was really about them trying to make sense of their own potential for suffering and them wanting to avoid that. In my Hebrew Bible class, the professor, Reverend Bowen, said, no one gets to give meaning or interpret someone else's suffering. And I like that. it's really up to each of us. Our suffering is ours, and we are the ones who get to interpret it and make sense of it. And sometimes that takes a very long time to make sense of it. But don't take that away from somebody. In terms of the theology of the story, and similar to other wisdom tradition books in the Hebrew Bible, it's confronting the idea of divine justice and how does divine justice work on the human realm. And that was the common theology of the day, that the good will be rewarded. Well, that theology is not so different than what we encounter today in many places. The idea that prosperity comes to you if you give to good causes, if you do the right things and are righteous, you will prosper financially and with wealth and happiness. There is a wonderful TED Talk about this topic by Kate Bowler, who is a religious history professor at Duke University. And she wrote a book called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. And she is a scholar of Christianity, Christian history, and her area of study is the prosperity gospel. The idea that you will benefit financially and materially if you are a good, faithful person. And in her TED Talk, she talks about how she was 35 years old. She had just gotten this awesome job at Duke University in their seminary as a professor. She had a young child. Her whole life was going great. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And her whole world just started collapsing around her. And she found that, she had made her scholarship on the Prosperity Bible, studying it, interviewing people, visiting churches, visiting people, talking all about it with people. But she didn't think that she had adopted that theology. But here she was with this cancer at 35, and she was saying, how could this happen to me? And she realized that was the same kind of, she was saying, I did everything right. How can this happen to me? And so she realized that she was using that same kind of theology. And in our country, in our society, it's very hard to get away from that idea. One of Job's friends had asked him, who being innocent has ever perished? That's his question to Job. So a modern day version of that might be something like, who being healthy has ever died? And we would never ask that because we all die. But we have this idea, and we do it, and COVID was a great example of this. We have this idea that if you're doing everything right, if you're eating well, exercising well, getting enough sleep, not drinking too much alcohol, if you're doing all these things, you're going to be healthy. How could you die? So that story and that those questions that his friends were asking him are still questions we use to keep other people's suffering at bay so we don't have to really feel it, but also to make ourselves feel like, oh, this isn't going to happen to me because I'm vegetarian. This isn't going to happen to me because I run every day, I go jogging every day. I'm not going to get cancer. So it's very pertinent, I think, to our time and how we encounter and work with suffering among others. So just one final little story I want to share. I became very interested in this idea of divine justice and punishment when I was 9. That's when I first started trying to figure it out. And we were taking a plane trip out west to see my family. It was very unusual, long plane ride. There started to be a lot of turbulence on the plane, and I started to think we were going to die. We were going to crash and we were going to die. So I thought, okay, well, I better start praying, because that's what you do, right? You pray and you ask God to save the plane. So I started praying, and then I started to become very concerned, because I thought, what if there's a bad person on this plane? And what if God's going to use that plane crash to teach that bad person a lesson? But it's going to hurt all these good people. So then I started to wonder, well, how many good people does it take to balance out the bad person? You know, if there are 20 bad people but 21 good people, are we going to stay up in the air, and vice versa? So I really like spent the rest of the plane ride, and passengers are groaning, we're bumping all over the place, and I'm trying to figure out this situation of divine justice. So I had to laugh as a seminary student when I reread Abraham's bargaining with God over the fate of the people in Sodom, because Abraham is trying to use some of that same logic with God, like, well, what if there's 10 good people there? Could you not destroy the town? And I just had to laugh because apparently this is a familiar human thing, trying to bargain and weigh and figure it out. When the plane landed, you might think that I had decided there were more good people on the plane than bad, but that isn't the conclusion I came to. So when that plane landed, and I was 9 years old, I came to the conclusion that God didn't work that way, that I didn't really know how God worked. I didn't really know what exactly God was, but I didn't think that God was keeping a tally on every single vehicle that was driving and flying and in the water, and weighing how many good people and how many bad people there were before deciding whether to crash the vehicle. So I thank my UU upbringing for that realization. So I just want to leave you with some questions to think about, and we'll have a little talkback session if you're interested afterwards, but you can just take these questions into your week and your day. So what do you think Job teaches us about the nature and the outcome of suffering? And how does that relate to how you were brought up to encounter suffering, and how you were brought up to relate to your own suffering or the suffering of other people around you? And how might we work with suffering, whether it's our own or someone else's, in a more gentle and kinder way? So I'll leave you with those questions today, and we will move into our final closing hymn, number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth. Now, as we extinguish our chalice, I'll share with you another of my favorite poets, Wendell Berry, in the poem In Praise of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lay down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.